Hello there, everyone. Hugo Bound Anderson here. So excited to be here today with Katharine Jarmul and Joe Reis. What is up, Katharine, and what is up, Joe?
Not much, man. I just got back from a hike, so if I'm looking a bit sweaty right now, I was up. Now I'm back down, I
You look
guess.
fantastic.
Thank you. You do
And you're in
too.
Utah, Salt Lake City, and
Yes.
Katharine, you are in Berlin.
This is correct.
Fantastic.
It's not much going on here.
Well, I don't believe that for a second about Berlin. But we're here today to talk about decentralized AI. And for everyone watching in the chat, we'll be having a Q&A and discussion on Discord. If you want to join the Discord, I can then filter the questions through, and it'll be in the podcasts channel. So just super excited to have you all engaged as much as possible. Um, this is a live stream of the Vanishing Gradients podcast, which we used to call a data podcast, and we called it a machine learning podcast. Now we call it an AI podcast. But of course, it's data all the way down, as we know. And we're here to talk today about the fact that the AI revolution will not be centralized. Hat tip to Ines Montani and her talk. The AI revolution will not be monopolized. As Catherine says, today's breakthroughs in hardware, privacy-aware machine learning, distributed data, and compute show us there's no reason to upload all of your data to a single model provider. These are the types of things we'll be getting into today. I just wanted to give a brief introduction to Catherine and Joe, people who need no introduction, but Catherine has worked in the space for a long time and offers trainings and advisory focused on building privacy-first data and AI and ML systems, products, and platforms. Definitely check her out on LinkedIn, and her website is it still kjamistan.com, Catherine? Great. She's also author of the O'Reilly book, the wonderful O'Reilly book, Practical Data Privacy, along with an earlier O'Reilly book on natural language processing in Python, which is what originally brought us together. Joe does many things. He helps data teams build systems at scale with clarity, real world insight, and a healthy dose of skepticism toward hype. And the healthier the dose, the better at the moment. Don't forget to eat your data broccoli, people, with Joe Reis. Joe is also never said or thought that before. Joe is also co-author of the best-selling Fundamentals of Data Engineering on O'Reilly, used by hundreds of thousands of professionals worldwide. Is there anything I missed or got obscenely wrong in that introduction, my friends?
Crypto influencer. I'm kidding.
Well, someone called me like a content creator the other day, and I think my therapist is definitely gonna get a few vacations out of that characterization. It's something I'm reckoning with. But look, why don't we just jump in? Actually, no, let's. I just want to say by way of motivation, the reason this podcast live stream came about is Joe and I did a podcast earlier this year where we just started talking about our mutual friend Katharine Jarmul, who we both learn from so much all the time and love dearly. And we were like, we should do one with her on decentralized AI. So we pinged her, and actually I spoke with Catherine about it recently in Berlin. We started a group chat, and here we are. So I'd love, Catherine, if you could just help us set up the conversation. So to have decentralized AI, I suppose it's worth talking briefly about centralized AI. So what is centralized AI and data, and what benefits does it have, and what problems arise from it?
I mean, to some degree, there's no such thing as centralized AI anymore in the traditional perspective, because obviously, as Joe book shows, as Hugo your work shows, we don't even keep all of the data and the processing in the same place anymore and haven't for quite some time. So to some degree, it's like breaking down the myth that we do have like this central monolith of some sort of software, central monolith of some sort of data, and central kind of Steuerung, central guidance for all of that. And I think that once we start to rip away the fact that we already have quite a distributed or decentralized compute environment and reason about it that way, then we can start to actually decide how would we like the system to work in regards to perhaps other concerns we might have, like privacy or security. And instead of just buying whatever's easiest off the shelf, actually start to reason and think about the way that our data moves, where our data is located, and then therefore also where things like our training or inference runs and how we can set up the system to actually reflect not only cost cutting mechanisms that we might want to optimize, but also things like, obviously, my work focuses on things like data privacy.
And so, what what type of benefits do I suppose the what we consider to be centralized AI have now? And then why are we here today? Why is thinking through decentralized AI and data so fundamental for us now?
Ooh, Joe, you want to talk about the myth of the growth of the data warehouse?
Well,
How much do you want to?
I don't think that the data warehouse goes away. I mean, the central notion is, integrating data from across sources and, having that in a common place to query. Like that's, been here for ages. But it's interesting now because you mentioned a couple of things that I'm curious about that I've been thinking about myself, which is, you mentioned things like figuring out your data and getting it in order and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, so why weren't we doing that before? Like what? Is this my biggest question right now, is this time going to be any different? Because this is all the foundational hard work that we're putting into it. This is something I podcasted about on Friday, actually, where I talked about Satya Nadella's letter to employees, whoever happens to be left at Microsoft, as well as shareholders and then just pundits and so forth. But he mentioned a very interesting thing, which I've been stewing on or not stewing, but thinking about a lot, which is there's been a lot of capex from a lot of big tech into AI, data centers, model training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's unclear if that money's being recouped yet, right? So, like, it's very unclear. We're still running at a massive loss. I mean, I think the definition that OpenAI and Microsoft had was for AGI was hitting 100 million in gross profit or something like that from AI. And then at that point, you would say AGI. Okay, my biggest question is, we're putting a lot of money into this stuff. The success rates have been quite abysmal still, enterprise-wide, like production implementations of AI. So, and if you trace back a lot of its data, a lot of it's the same stuff we've been dealing with for decades. And so I'm kind of like, is this the moment when we're actually going to start working on better data, working on better security, working on better this or that or the other thing, or are we just going to punt it again like we have with every other craze that's come along, which there's been many. So it's one of my big questions in terms of getting to any type of production AI or the central questions. Or is a supposition that AI will just become so sentient and powerful, it'll just solve all those problems for us, and then we'll just be on our way, right? Like, that is a hypothesis that some people share. So, I think that what your central point, which you led with, I think is a very interesting one because it's one that we've been struggling with as an industry for decades, not just today, but and so it's an interesting one. Like we're still barely getting data warehousing correct, right? And now we're going to do other stuff, ambient agents, all this other thing. All right, so this is a big disconnect I've been thinking about lately. But the messaging for big tech is you got to do this because we spend a lot of money on the shit and we have to like get paid somehow. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that, I don't want to go on a tangent. I would argue that the recuperation comes when targeted ads come with your monthly pro subscription, but that's neither here nor there. I think your
It's
point
actually
is
a
really
pretty big point, but yeah, we can talk about that later.
I think your point though, like going back to the idea of like centralized versus decentralized, is kind of related to like a continued argument, I feel like in data governance circles, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, is a big push that I have as more like a privacy security oriented person is perhaps like we would need to have less governance, A, if we collected less data, and B, if we allowed what is like the true meaning of data protection laws, which we're not going to get into the actual what got implemented or whatever, but the true meaning is like there's a relationship of trust between the person giving the data and the person managing the data. And therefore, things like data quality are easier to guarantee because there's like a a direct relationship there. And then secondly, perhaps not all of that data needs to be, centralized in whatever it is, warehouse, otherwise. And if we're actually going to do this, I agree with you, by like principles, by the original ideas, let's go back to, original design of computing centers. We might have governance experts then that are either domain focused or product focused or something like this, and they can help guide some of the way that data comes into our centralized spaces, and then also directly interact with people who might end up being able to help manage their data and the veracity of their data if it is available to them and made visible to them. Now, that hasn't been incentivized by any means because most of the ways that we've made money from data have been by making it quite intransparent the way data is collected and used. And if that continues, then I agree that we will continue having the same quality governance. And I know your special interest modeling problems because we're just like slopping up whatever we can get. We're storing it in whatever quote unquote idea of centralized that we have. And then we're just giving access hin and her, and anybody can grab anything. What I challenge us to think about, or I guess like why decentralized AI is so interesting to me, is perhaps we can think of leaving data closer to the edge, or at least closer to the edge than we have, and therefore have not only better trust and privacy guarantees, but a better conversation with the people whose data is actually is, so that I can go in and say, often my Google Ads thinks I'm like a 35-year-old man, I think, you know what I mean? So I could
We thought
actually,
so too, actually.
well, there you go. But it's like perhaps with the companies you have trust with, then they can have better data and yeah, be curious to your thoughts.
I mean, it's an interesting one, right? The decentralization argument's been going on, it's been, I mean, crypto, that was when I think in tech it sort of blew it open. You had microservices before, obviously, and a few other attempts at decentralization. With data, obviously, with this, this sort of blew the lid off on the data world, and now, Zermac's working on a very similar or extending the architecture of data mesh into autonomous agents and autonomous data products. And so, and it's been an interesting journey. I would say if I look at what's happened with, well, there's a couple threads. I'll talk about data mesh first, and I'll talk about federated data governance next, which is an interesting topic. But the data mesh was it blew onto the scene, what kind of the late 2010s with two articles that Schmuck did on ThoughtSpot's blog, and that ushered in a whole revolution, which I still am very bullish on. I think it's going to play out. The challenge of it is just that organizationally, right? A lot of companies are still, it's just classic Conway's law, right? Like you can't get around it. It's just the universal gravity of like an organization. So you're going to build the systems of communications and architecture according to the org chart and how the company communicates and so forth. And so that's then sort of one of the hard things. And then I think also decentralization became sort of a what I like about what you're saying is there's a notion of decentralization, I think, in its purest sense, which we've, been, I think, sort of. I remember the early days of the internet and the web, growing up with that whole notion of this kind of global village and everyone, owns their data and basically has a homestead on the internet and so forth. And like that was I think an interesting vision back in the early 90s that I subscribed to as a teenager, and I still wish that would have happened. Then along came the corporations and the big money, and then that obviously changed because you had the walled gardens like early on CompuServes, AOL, blah blah blah. They got blown apart by Google basically and the web browser. But that ushered in basically other types of walled gardens like Facebook and Google and everything else, right? So, but it is interesting, I think, in the sense where if you couple that whole trend with where companies are, there's been a lot of parallels. I think the decentralization, like everyone was interested in data mesh for a while, right? I think they still are, but I think at the same time, they started looking at this as um, data sharing, for example, became, or data products became basically, I'm going to share tables or I'm going to share, an Excel file in SharePoint or something like that. That's not quite the same because what's missing is that federated computational governance layer that sort of underpins everything. And that's still being built. I know that's what Shamak's working on. And so, but I do wish that we would get to that notion of decentralized data. I mean, I've, consciously made it a point to use, privacy browsers now. I don't use Chrome unless I'm absolutely forced to, and, doing my own little things there. And, it feels good to give a subtle middle finger to big tech. Um, but it is fascinating because I see the same thing happening with AI models right now, right? Where like the creation of these models is concentrated in the hands of a few players. Just it reminds me a lot of the walled gardens that we saw in the early days of the web, and the information superhighway where you had like to me, OpenAI is basically AOL of today. Like it's almost literally the same thing. Like it's for the longest time AOL was synonymous with the internet. You'd get those CDs in the mail and I'd use them for coasters for beer and stuff, but like that, but there's going to be something else that comes along. And I think the interesting thing is, especially right now with sort of the way geopolitically the world's going, it's becoming a lot more fragmented and I think a lot less certain in terms of which direction things go. So I think this is a good time to have a decentralization discussion, sort of think about what's next. And data governance circles, I'll just finish out here. I'm working with one author right now on a book on federated data governance, and he's taking a much different approach. Data governance up to now has been very much a centralized committee. I would say, um, it's almost become its own meme in some ways, like you're doing seances over the data and trying to govern it and so forth. And I think it's mostly been a lost cause in a lot of companies. It's seen as basically a barrier to everything, so people just circumvent it. And it's easy to do because they're just a committee that doesn't get a lot of attention normally. Um, Often seen as an annoyance. You're like, cool, I'll just go behind you and do everything, and I don't need. That's why you have shadow data projects everywhere, right? The interesting thing right now is with vibe coding apps. I'm very curious to see like what this next shadow IT looks like when everyone's just vibe coding apps galore, letting them run in the business and nobody even knows that they're there. This will be very fascinating to see. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things, but the decentralization argument, I'm very curious to see how this shapes out. I think we're very uh, like-minded in a lot of ways, KJ and probably Hugo as well. And don't, I personally don't like the idea of everything being controlled and homogenized by big tech companies. I think it creates a very boring society, and I think it's really dangerous.
Without a
It's
doubt.
like
And I love that you named data science. I haven't heard that term before, but these acts of naming, this is something I'm getting tingles down my spine. Even should even maybe organize a group called data science because a lot of it has been incantations for so long. I also maybe we can move the conversation in this direction at some point. I do love that you mentioned OpenAI is AOL-esque, and I'd be interested in chatting about what we all think the moat for OpenAI is, because I kind of half joke is that they don't even have the network effects of MySpace. Um,
I think their
and
mode
look
is
what,
lobbying.
well, right. And they also say memory is a moat, but I don't necessarily buy that either. Laura Summers has a wonderful question or series of interconnected thoughts and questions in Discord. Laura asks, this is something I struggle with. Why is it so hard for people to conceptualize decentralized data? Is it just too much given the challenges of centralized data? A lot of the problems we were describing in data warehouses, or do we need to see examples of success stories before any of the big corporations will be brave enough to try this out themselves?
I don't think decentralized data is incentivized if you're already a large technology company. Like by default, the moat of Google, let's say when we say we're going to Google something, which was for years and years the source of information, right? The moat, what there was information moat, and also the ability that everybody used Google is even more information. And I think that's the same playbook that OpenAI is trying to play, except the most interesting new development I've seen with OpenAI is if you look at the more recent papers, like half the authors are writers. They're like hiring like sitcom writers and other writers from Hollywood and stuff. So I think like the idea is that OpenAI can create personalities that you find engaging and also be your single source of information. This combination, your new AI best friend telling you what the truth is perhaps quite valuable if that actually comes to pass. But decentralized data, I think like Joe says, and I don't know, we are being very millennial right now, but like as also a 90s kid on the IRC chats and with the web rings and this and that, I think been a big push since that time against having extremely diverse voices given fair audience play. And what we've seen with the growth of influencers and so forth is like people have been trying to do this, but it's always on some particular platform and it's always with some particular angle. And of course, it may or may not, be using misinformation or other types of things that perhaps we actually as a society don't want to some degree because we gain these engagement metrics. But I think that the hard part of thinking through decentralized data is what I referred to in a keynote a while ago as like the VisiCalc moment for decentralized data. In that case, I was talking about personalized AI. So how am I going to personally use AI for myself locally? But I think what we need to see, and the VisiCalc was like the moment that the Apple computer took off. It was like the first time that somebody on a PC saw that they could use their data to do something interesting. It was basically like an early Excel program. And what I would love to see and is what is like the VisiCalc moment for using your own data on your own device in a federated manner that you're going to benefit from that makes it then more valuable for you. It's like the web ring space of today, then contributing to OpenAI or Gemini or whatever it is, right?
I
So
mean,
from a user perspective, then I'm just wondering what a decentralized AI experience would look like, because as we've said, there's no need to now upload all of your data to a single model provider. So what's the vision then for decentralized AI?
I mean, I don't necessarily think there has to be one vision. I mean, so I come from a background of federated or distributed learning. So this could be the case that numerous people, numerous organizations, or entire community or groups of friends like the three of us can get together and train something together. So that is perhaps one view. In that we don't need to put our data all in one place. We just need to organize that we exchange, updates and other things as we go along. But I think that that's also like a very myopic view of what that's like one of many things that it could look like. It could also look like, I think I run four models myself locally on different hardware that I have available, and I build myself my own kind of super system that I use where I send out different queries to different things to process, right? Or it could be that Joe lets me use some of his hardware or access to some of his things so that I can build something for him, right? It could be any of these things that doesn't require one centralized, essentially manager of all of these, which therefore, is why it offers an alternative to like the tech powers that be.
I was a bit disappointed in Apple, really, because I thought that they would at least have shown a model from a scalable hardware perspective of having federated on-device AI, but it feels like they all but gave up on that approach. I know people at Apple, and I think one of the people who work in data at Apple, and one of the big problems there is there's no data to work on. So like they've been trying to build machine learning models on for various things, and the problem is, lo and behold, you kind of need data to train on. I think they tried to do synthetic data for a bit, and that didn't work too well. In fact, it's interesting. So the only data that Apple can get from you is if you opt into their longitudinal health research app, and even then, it's really locked down. So people I know there, they spend most of their time talking to privacy lawyers at Apple, and they're usually told yes or no, you can do this or you can't. Usually same monotone finger pointing I just gave. So that's kind of the challenge, but I was really hopeful that Apple would have some because I know they had like the on-device model that you could use, and that would be pretty dope. But I don't know. So it's anyway. So it'd be curious to see like what approaches we take, to make decentralization a reality. So because right now my thing is, for kind of just whatever stuff. whatever type of work I'm doing. Coding, I use Claude. Gemini, I sort of just use for like regular search, if I need to, because it's Google's data and it's pretty good. OpenAI I just use for like general questions because it does have memory and it does really gaslight me in terms of being a good friend. But if I have, private questions or stuff like that that I don't want being ingested, I use just hosted models on my laptop. So Olama, for example, right? I can just ask it that, and that's presumably private. But with Sam Altman the other day, where he talked about how yeah, anything you type into ChatGPT is discoverable legally. So like that should give you pause. Like I don't use this thing as a for your deepest, darkest secrets and stuff. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. But it's interesting when I talk to my kids too, because they hate AI, actually. They're like 12 and almost 15, and they're like, yeah, because they think what they see is it just makes everything the same. Like they can catch on to that, right? So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, like you, I was pretty bullish that Apple would do something to release some foundation models that you could then personalize. Like Apple also hired some really interesting researchers in the space of taking local data sets and then essentially personalizing via some of the ways that the embeddings work what was happening on your device, like data about you or local data, as it was called, with some type of idea of a foundation model or something like this. But I was also really disappointed to basically see the message we're giving up for now. I think it leaves a big open playing space for potentially organizations that have a lot of data, like let's say publishing companies or media companies or something like this, to pair with consumer grade types of companies like Apple. Because in my ideal world, you have a foundation model that's fairly trustworthy. Well, you can maybe choose whatever flavor you have, and then you have the ability to take your own data and easily transfer some of the ways that you like to consume information to the models for your own personal experience. One of the ideas that I had around that too, or one of the things that I would love to see, is then that I can compare my personalized model with other people around me and decide who I might like to either exchange models with or train with because we have mutual interests or because also our interests are maybe divergent. And maybe that's also useful for me to hear divergent viewpoints of something like this. I think there's opportunity now that the information game is becoming even more consolidated that that may offer an alternative, but I'm not
It's an
sure.
interesting idea, though, sort of this like meta vector map of like everybody's vectors. And then we how similar am I to KJ or Hugo? Yeah, it's and Google kind of did that. I mean, it's interesting is Google had the ability to do that back with Google Wave back in the day when they're trying to break into social networking. They had everyone's profile and interests, and they, in typical fashion, didn't do it. But yeah, it's
I
interesting.
miss Google Wave a lot. And in fact, this is going to get really geeky along a different vector now. But I was actually at grad school doing my PhD in maths at the time, and the renderable LaTeX in Google Wave is how like I shared like manuscript stuff with collaborators. It was that and like macro, you could define your macros in there and stuff, and then once again, killed by Google, which we'll definitely link to Killed by Google in the show notes. I'm interested. We've talked about a lot of kind of different interesting aspects of decentralized AI, but for viewers and listeners who don't necessarily even know what, federated learning is, for example, or distributed governance, I'm wondering, if you, like both of you, could kind of just give us a 101 or beginner's guide to kind of the important parts of the space.
KJ, you can take it off or kick it off.
Okay, we'll
You've
start
been thinking about this a lot more than I have. So,
just in a different way, I think. But yeah, federated learning. Let's take that. Federated learning came originally from I mean, probably was started before that, but the first time that it was really published, that it was in production systems, was from Google, who was using it essentially to do next word prediction for smart keyboard, because it was noticed that, for example, predicting non-English languages, so languages other than English, next word prediction, and particularly things like emoji use and other things like this, was not very useful. Obviously, collecting keyboard data is super icky, and you should make sure that no apps on your phone collect keyboard data. That's like pretty bad because then it's your keyboard for everything that you type into. Anyways, that aside, they were like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. We're probably going to get a huge fine if we do. And therefore develop the idea of federated learning, which is essentially let's decentralize the learning process. Let's push the learning to the edge so learning can happen on device. And then only the updates, which either means the gradient updates or the weights of the local models or some abstraction of the weights of the local models, are then exchanged, usually via some sort of centralized or regional aggregators that are then used to update the models with an average of all of those updates or with some dropout variant of those updates, and then set out to continue the processes. Now, that was, I don't know, about 8 years ago now. So obviously the field has gone much further. There's a lot of really interesting things. Flower is a group that was originally a research group and now a product that recently trained across several continents, the first LLM trained in a federated fashion, which is cool because I feel like they're breaking down barriers. A lot of people are like, but latency, but this, but that. And that's all just a bunch of baloney because, yeah, we have latency anyways in the data centers that we train in, and we have problems with data parallelism in the data centers we train with. And so federated learning has become quite a hot research topic and also a real production environment topic. Now, many places use federated learning because of data locality regulation or other concerns about data locality, that they don't want to move the data across continental borders or would be expensive or would be useless. And some people use it for things like, why would we even want to centralize the data in the first place? So when you start looking at industry, so factory work and this type of production, you could see that in even outside of learning for analytics or something, we might want to push that to the device. And I might only want to hear from you if this particular data pattern happens, which shows me that a motor might be functioning improperly or something on the machine floor might be functioning improperly. And only then, or only when I run a federated query, do I want that information in any type of centrally available manner. And so, yeah, there's many different ways we can use it. But the cool thing is that recent research by Google for an algorithm called DLOCO showed that federated learning actually has quite a lot of advantages, even when training massive models that cannot fit in one data center. So,
It's pretty cool.
That's super cool. And I'm wondering what other concepts do you think or techniques do you think people should know about if they're going to start thinking about decentralized AI in particular?
I mean, I would push to Joe to define federated governance because I think the big problem that we run into even with federated learning is, does the data across our federated whoever population that we're trying to train with, does the data match up? Is it reasonable? Do we have like a bunch of null values? Like what's the quality? All of these types of things is like core part of how we could even try to begin to train when we don't have a central actor, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be lazy and actually see what how does Shamak define it? Because she's the one that this is her fault. She started this. I'm kidding. Page.
And Joe, also feel free to push any questions back to Catherine because you and I did set this up so we
You
could
define it,
grill her.
Catherine. I'm just kidding. Let me see here. Yeah, I mean it's I won't even bother. So thinking about what she wrote and then what what Winfried's working on with his book on federated governance, it's really a framework where again if we're talking about like human, centric governance, for example, right? It means the act of data governance is distributed to people who touch data. Like I think right now the problem is with the centralized governance, and Winfried's argument is that it's not working, right? There's a bottleneck, and it's a data governance work. And with bottlenecks, it creates loopholes. You can get around them, yada yada yada. And so his whole approach is, you people need to, um, people working on data products own the governance piece at the end of the day. I think it's as pretty much simple as that. Now the federated computational governance part is one of those things where it takes into account basically what you were sort of describing, which is like automated checks, balances. Like, is the data what I'm supposed to be getting, right? Is it of standard form? What is the shape of it? What does it contain? What's the metadata and so forth? So, but that's still being built. That's the thing that Jamac's building over at Next Data right now, right? So that doesn't exist. Well, it does exist, but it's early forms of it still, right? But that was the missing piece. That's why data mesh, that's one of the big reasons data mesh didn't take off, at least in my opinion. That, and also I think people were approaching it wrong, but it was the federated computational governance, because it's not just data within organizations, right? It's sharing data between companies and to a logical extent between people, right? So another person working on this kind of stuff is Martin Kleppman, if you know him, who's doing local first, which is not a food co-op or a farmer's market. It is local first computation, right? So if you could imagine Google Docs, but you have a local copy of it, you can edit it. Other people can collaborate on the doc, right? But
I
it's
think
all
you mean it's
local.
not only a, a farmer's market.
It's not only a farmer's market, yes. Yeah, but you can get your locally grown data there. You can export it and so forth. But at the end of the day, right, it's local. There's not an intermediary. So if you go through Google Docs and looking at Notion right now, these are all companies that, your data is it's there, right? So we all use Google Docs, I'm sure, just because it's convenient and it's sort of the default way that everyone shares documents now, right? And the alternative is to go the other centralized route and share and email a Word doc to somebody like a barbarian back in the, you know, last decade or so. My lawyer still emails me Word docs. I'm like, what is wrong with you? I pay you good money. You shouldn't do this to me.
Well, yeah, lawyers and tax dudes, and I mean, sometimes they want you to come in for meetings.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, we hired a CPA firm and they wanted to meet. I'm like, dude, I don't have time. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
it's
I'm in
Also,
Germany, so
oh yeah, don't you still have the fax things? Or they got rid of that recently.
so actually like the fax was the hack, you know? Like if you faxed, you got seen sooner than email. Because there was essentially a policy that you answer the fax every day versus the email
Oh, and they're
inbox
German,
so
so
as well.
they
Yeah.
will follow the
Yeah.
rule.
So
well,
they
wait,
changed the policy, I'm pretty sure. So it used to
when
be a hack and to get to the front of the line.
when I when I lived and worked in Germany, I had a lot of interactions, as Catherine would know and recall from her own experience, with the Ausländerbehörden, which is the alien office or something like whatever it is, right? Like it's for, like literally it's for the outsiders stuff. And I had to receive faxes from them, and the only hack I could find was finding a service that would receive faxes and send them to me as emails. So
Yep. Yep.
there
Well,
you
Holden
go.
Corral actually, Holden Corral, with her Fight Health Insurance project. The crazy thing is, I'm not sure if you're aware of like how this works, but to have to file a dispute on your health insurance claims, because that is a thing in America. Um, it's so you have to fax in your dispute. So what Holden has, she set up a whole system which automates the faxing of these things, so you can just have her service do that for you, which is bananas. But
That is
that's
wild. So
it's
before moving on, one more thing about faxes that has nothing to do with this at all. But my dad once received a fax from Hunter S. Thompson.
oh
So my dad was
Oh,
an academic and like cultural writer and that type of stuff. And he reviewed Hunter S. Thompson book very favorably. That had been, I think, panned elsewhere, and he received like a gratitude fax essentially from Hunter S. Thompson. The wild thing is, remember that like glossy fax paper where like the ink would fade after a while?
yeah
we found it later. Like my dad had put it in a particular place and it had disappeared. It was a blank piece of glossy paper in the end, which we still have somewhere. But everything fades in the end, including the wonderful spirit of our gonzo journalist. So we've talked about federated learning. I'm wondering, are there any other things? So I'm not. I want to learn as well, Catherine. So I'm wondering, is differential privacy and homomorphic encryption and these types of things still relevant to think about today? Because I just want to make sure people get a takeaway of the things they should start thinking about if they want to start working with decentralized data and AI.
I mean, the interesting thing is obviously in federated learning, many of the frameworks that we use today, they exchange weights. And depending on the type of data used for a model, these weights can leak information. And so when we start thinking about why or how we would use something like differential privacy, or why or how we would use something like encryption, so particularly for distributed protocols, MPC or multi-party computation works quite well, then this is one way that we would think of taking those updates, potentially encrypting those updates, sending them to a service that can work on the data encrypted, add differentially private noise where we're running that computation, and then decrypt essentially. That could be what I refer to in the book as secure and private aggregation. What one cool thing, so when I wrote the book now 3 years ago, that was still very research cutting edge, that's now becoming, or I'm starting to see more real projects, is the idea that perhaps we don't need one centralized aggregator or even a myriad of aggregators that can work together. There's more and more projects where I'm seeing the cool protocols in kind of distributed compute protocols that have been used for a long time with decentralized idea to manage the workflows between multiple devices. And if we really think, okay, we're worried about privacy and security. Let's say we live in a country where we're worried about surveillance of our activities, where we're worried about even communicating with one another might be something that we're concerned about, and certainly the context of what we're communicating about, we might be worried about, or what we want to learn with. Like, let's say we're exchanging messages or texts, or we're learning with documents, maybe even banned documents. These are all things that then we'd want to actually take a step back, do real threat modeling, and then eventually, hopefully, find protocols that do not have that one big aggregator, because of course this becomes the singular point of failure or the singular point of attack. All of that is, of course, like if you're curious, what I would ask you to first be curious before you step into federated is perhaps first be curious, as Joe pointed out, with like local first data. And this basically means setting up models on your computer, using local models, or even building yourself like a little load balancer, which a lot of companies build in a production setting when they're, like Joe said, and I know like Hugo does, use one model for this, use another model for this, use another model for this. So perhaps even formalizing that in a kind of piece of load balancer software. I know there's many available. I've been meaning to do a comparison. Maybe this will bring me to be a comparison. And then yourself, also for your own usage, this helps you decide who knows what. And when we have that load balancer, we could also start to think of privacy protections. So you could even, for example, have something there that sanitizes input. You could have something there that rewrites input. So that's not exactly in your voice if you're sending it to an external model. You could have something there that writes it in the style of Hunter S. Thompson. Whatever it is that you want to do, you can start to play around with these ideas because at the end of the day, you're getting used to the types of things that you want to do locally. Then you can perhaps start fine-tuning local models, so personalizing them to yourself. And when you've reached that step, I think then you're ready to enter federated learning because then you've already been learning on device or on whatever compute you have available to you. And stepping into how to do federated learning with friends becomes a little bit easier once you've made those steps.
I love the idea of federated learning with friends. We've got data sciences, we've got federated learning with friends. And I'm so glad that we're indexing more and more on local models. I hate the term small large language models. So can we just call them language models? No one said that in this conversation, just to be clear. Joe mentioned Olama. There are many ways to do this. Olama is one of my favorites, and it's so easy to get up and running. Even with, when you don't necessarily have a lot of, hardware on your laptop, there are small models you can play around with. I love the small Gemma models, for example, and I'll link to this in the show notes. But I've done a series of workshops with Ravin Kumar from DeepMind, who works on all the Gemma stuff about getting up and running
That's
locally
cool.
with the Gemma
And
models.
even if you're on your mobile device too, like DuckDuckGo as a browser, they have the open source models, so you can pick whatever one you want. DuckDuckGo says they don't, store your chats and you can delete them, so they say. So I believe them. But it is a good way to get, I would say, like pretty innocuous questions answered if you're on the go. Like I just use those 'cause, that's pretty good. Brave even has their own large language model, which I think is, or their own AI, which is kind of interesting. It's okay, right? But um, yeah, or you could just use Grok. That's really hinged and very sane. So
I
had a
thought it
lot
was
of
more
fun with
like
that.
Tinder.
What's that?
I thought you said it was Hinge like the dating app, so I said it's more like Tinder. But then I just realized
Hinged.
maybe
Yes,
you
try all
you
your
did
dating on
you were saying
Grok. You
it's
will,
Hinged.
yeah, yeah. Use Grok for a dating app. That'd be pretty hilarious. You'll meet like just the craziest people, I'm sure. Um,
You'll
uh,
definitely get what you're asking for and more, I think.
Oh, I was using Grok because all my friends were saying I can make really crazy images I can't make anywhere else. I'm like, I don't want to know what you're talking about, but I'm gonna try and see. And see. So I won't say what I did, but it did work for the most part. And I would say these are very unhinged things that could be banned in most countries. So yeah, but it will do
I'll, I'll
it. It'll
also
do it for you.
I'll
And
also
now you can't have woke AI in the US anymore. So now you just can be able to create the craziest shit ever. It's fine. So,
I was just going to say there are more and more things arising like this, but I've got an app on my phone called MLC Chat, which allows me to download like smaller language models and
uh,
chat with them on my phone. Like it burns battery like not as quickly as it used to, but this is amazing, right? Like this is abs that I can run like a 3B model on my cell phone.
what kind of phone do you, are you Apple or are you Android?
I'm Apple,
What's it called?
shamefully.
M
MLC Chat.
Shit. All right, I'm gonna try this out here. Okay.
Um, Awesome. Do. So, Catherine, I'm interested. Doing this is it an accurate characterization to say working with decentralized AI and decentralized data um, is is harder than not doing it?
I mean, um, I guess it depends how good the data is that you're working with in a centralized fashion. So if, as Joe said, like it's just a mess, then it's just more of that, except imagine that across many devices that you may or may not have access to.
That will make it
So,
better.
but I mean, one thing we didn't touch on, Joe, I'd be curious to your opinions on this. A lot of times when I'm meeting and talking with other like federated or distributed learning people, what they push or what I found to be some of
Mhm.
the hardest parts is thinking through the identity and access problem, which we'll leave to the side for now, but then thinking through what I call like distributed data engineering problem, which is basically, let's say I already kind of assume that certain data might be available in whatever it is. Maybe it's a computer, maybe it's a phone, whatever it is. Maybe it's like a small chip on a like embedded device or something like this. But I actually need to pre-process that in a meaningful way and to be able to ship that across potentially different compute environments and to have it run on each of them as the pre-processing step before the learning step can happen. And this is a non-trivial engineering problem right now. I'm wondering, is there like a data engineering breakthrough that is like right around the corner that's gonna solve
I don't
this?
know of anything like that, because that would entail having a consistency of a data model, for example, or transformation mechanism, right? And um, schema registries, data contracts, but in a distributed fashion on edge. I'm sure people are doing this, right? But I can't imagine this is something that you could just whip up. But you could vibe code it, I guess, and whip it up, and then you'd be fine. So maybe you could do it.
I'm so glad
That's
you've
a,
finally come around to vibe coding Joe,
you
because
know,
you know
it's
we've gone head to head
I
before.
I can't say I came around to it. I just sort of accepted that the world's crazy and it just is what it is. I got other shit to worry about, so I'm like, do you want to do that? If you want to blow up your production database like Jason Lemkin did, go for it. Not my problem. Um, I think I posted the other day as an aside too. I think the AI apocalypse is going to happen when just all these rogue agents, and vibe coding tools just do like collectively do like drop table, drop database, and all corporate databases around the world simultaneously.
We just got
So
to get
yeah,
it trending via Grok, and then the other ones will catch on.
they will. Yeah, that's the hive mind. They'll just align on that thing, and Um, I mean, actually, that would be pretty devastating if you were to do that. So, but yeah, it is interesting. But yeah, the problem you suggest, Kat, I mean, that's a next gen um, type problem. But I'm pretty sure, right? Like that, assuming decentralization continues, or in fact, though, when you start thinking about the possibility of like humanoids and robots and all that, that actually opens up the possibilities to a further extent for this decentralization because now you have data in the wild, right? And drones and all this other stuff. And so I think right now we've been so focused on, sort of this internal centralized database. But as you have what Elon Musk is predicting, he predicts a lot of stuff, but like 5 humanoid robots per person, right? So that's, potentially tens of billions of these things, not including drones. So yeah, acting in a hive mind, for example, right? Assuming you have that with ambient agents and all this other stuff that are just kind of out running in the wild, yeah, you're going to need a completely different way of handling data, like stuff that doesn't exist right now. Um, and so that's an interesting thought experiment. Like I've been telling people this, like go ask AI, like, the fun thing to do right now is ask AI, like, if you were to design a data model, an architecture from the ground up, what would this look like? It does not exist right now. What it comes up with is very different than what we have. Um, I can, I can, I had a chat with it last night because I was having a beer with my friend. He was in town. What was this one? Um, I can just read this to you if I can find it.
Yeah, talk us through some of the chat, man.
So it's interesting, right? So I asked it, I was in a movie about a month ago, 28 years later, good movie, I was kind of bored once. So I asked it, if you were to reimagine data and AI infrastructure from first principles for AI agents, how would you design it, right? And it's like, so AI, agent native data architecture, real-time knowledge graphs as core storage, event-driven state management, semantic data layers, contextual compute orchestration, multimodal fusion architecture, hierarchical caching for reasoning layers, and all the stuff that does like it's not here yet. Shared working memory, adaptive security and access control, to Catherine's point. Right, so this would be intent-based security. And so anyway, but I asked that was the one I asked Claude, and I asked the other AIs the same question. It came up with very similar architectures. So. I'm surprised they aren't just building it behind the scenes right now. They probably are. They're just like saying they're building
I mean,
a dating app or something.
to be like overly boring about it, what it could also be is like if Olama introduced like a local data governance layer that was actually usable from a human perspective, because we haven't had those in a long time. And you could actually say, okay, here's all my email, because you can download your email. Here's all my Google Drive, because you can download your Google Drive. Can you make a workflow for me where you pull the document that somebody asks if I get an email incoming? And can you only run it when my computer's on and give me the final okay check that for me to approve or whatever, right? Like we could solve it in very boring software oriented ways, but it's the matter of who wants to do that because that means that the data still does stay local, right?
Hmm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This could be done right now. So yeah, I mean, Claude Code can just write it for you and just tell it what to do, and it'll just do it. And ironically, then they have all your data and all your code and stuff. But whatever, it's fine. It's interesting, but yeah.
So I'm interested in, just with the current focus on and hype around agents, which I like the ability of LLMs to be able to automate things, I think or the ability of us to automate or be in the loop with LLMs that actually do things, and I think is quite powerful. I think they bring like vastly more significant privacy and security concerns, particularly when we're essentially asking of them to have access to everything from our chats to emails to, Google Slides to whatever it is. Um, I'm wondering how we can think about this, Catherine, particularly with respect to if we're using LLMs that are more centralized than not.
I mean, I think like here's the problem is by design, the way that these chat interfaces work is it's like a very intimate conversation, right? And I think that that isn't a random choice. I think that's like a very
By
um,
design.
quite interesting choice because even I was thinking about the other day, like how come we don't have group chat available? Like where I could, and we saw this with Slack and with numerous other things, like you used to be able to invite bots in and this and that, whatever. But I think by design, creating this kind of like private chat experience, and even with the way that most of the interfaces look, they look very private and intimate, and therefore, I don't know how many people know of Joseph Weizenbaum's work, but he wrote the first kind of like AI, like chat therapy bot called Eliza. You can look it up on Wikipedia, Eliza. And he actually like threw away his development of the program because he found one of his colleagues in the office like saying all these very personal, private things to this bot. And he was like found it abhorrent because he was like, it's just a computer. Like, why are you sharing all of this private thing? And the person, I believe it might have been like one of the secretaries or other people that helped transcribe some of the academic work he was working on, said, but it listened and I liked talking with it, right? And I think like very much that's what we see with some of the also even agent design is this idea of this like helpful thing that can help us. But from a privacy perspective, that means I'm much more willing to share more intimate information, maybe even information I wouldn't share with my friends or family, because it does have this like idea that I'm talking with something that maybe can't tell on me, right? So I think that's all by design. I think the issue is going to be like, how do we take the usefulness out of some of these things and maybe even some of the things that people are using it for, like therapy or like, to deal with whatever problems are happening in their life? How do we not strip that whatever it is that people need while still actually trying to point out that, sending all your deepest, darkest secrets to a centralized AI chat is maybe not going to long term be the choice that you be willing to make. And I think, that's a difficult conversation that I feel like we probably should be having more often than we are.
Yeah, I guess I was listening to a podcast on my hike this morning, and they were talking about how people are using things like Claude Code for non-coding exercises, actually. So, because Claude just looks at everything in your computer as a file, it doesn't really care. So you can use it for all kinds of stuff, actually. Like use your imagination. So marketers are using it, salespeople are using it, like everyone, I wouldn't say everyone, but it's being used for non-coding use cases. Um, somebody asked me why I don't like Claude Code, right? And I think it's not because I don't like the what it can do, but I feel like I'm giving it too much agency on my computer. And that's, I think that should concern you, especially if you buy things like Macs for privacy reasons, and you're going to let this third-party tool just like run rampant potentially. Yeah, I don't know that that's smart, but um, hey, you can write more code, so you can do that or do whatever. So I guess that's but I think that that's a downside, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of things like like more like demos really, but you have Operator and Claude's computer use and stuff, and now more agents and whatnot. But like, are you gonna who here is gonna let them just run free on your laptop right now? Sight unseen, just do whatever. I wouldn't.
Not at all. Yeah, and,
No.
and I never use cursor and YOLO mode. I know some people do,
Hmm.
but I mean, I give my agents read access
Right.
to sandbox versions of my local file system as well. And but not write access. And if it wants to write, I make sure I'm in the loop there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's just it. But the thing is, all this data is being sent back to these companies. Like, here's, you know, you know, so that's just it. Like, if you don't, I mean, so I think it's going to come down to like, how are you going to safely partition your device so that it can act on certain things? Because right now, they say there's no, there's no problem. It'll be isolated, but I don't know that. You can't prove that either, right? So that's the whole
Absolutely.
problem.
And finally, just a quick shout out to Ty Dunn. I don't know if you all know continue.dev, but it's an open source AI code assistant that, like, think of Cursor, but you can actually use it all with local models. And I've linked to that
That's cool.
in Discord. You can use it with Claude and all of that stuff, but they're doing super cool
That's
work
right.
there.
Hopefully, there's
Yeah,
more stuff like that, right? I mean, I think that these tools are powerful. I mean, I subscribe to Cursor, I subscribe to Copilot as well, and I think they're great. And Claude and everything else I use. But it's like at the same time, yeah, I'm not ready to give it control. Call me a boomer, I don't care. But it's computer use. Like I remember checking that out back over Christmas time, and that was pretty cool actually. Like
mm,
I had it in demo mode. Like I just gave it some instructions, like find me awesome restaurants in this area, and put it in a Google sheet and sort it by rating, and it did it. I was like, cool, that's pretty cool. But I'm gonna run it in the Docker container. There's no way I'm gonna run this on my machine. Like that would be insane.
totally. And one thing I do appreciate about Anthropic is, like, they were like, hey, yo, like, be very careful with this. This is incredibly dangerous, incredibly experimental. Dockerize, do not mess around, people.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so, but that's the next thing but we're talking about, federated AI, and now it's going to be federated agents too. It's not just the chatbots anymore. It's, ambient agents running around doing stuff behind the scenes. Hopefully they're doing the work you say. Hopefully they're not colluding and stealing your money and turning into Bitcoin. But that's the future we're in, or the present, really. I mean, it's crazy. I wrote the other day, like, it feels like every Philip K. Dick novel is like coming true simultaneously right now, and it's pretty fascinating just to.
Dude was a prophet.
He really was. I mean, took a lot of acid, but I think it may have helped him. So,
Totally. There's actually one thing in the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep that Blade Runner was based on that isn't in the film. There are a few key things, but one is there's a whole economy around robotic domestic animals. The world has no animals anymore, and they're like robot dogs that are like, I think incredibly expensive, but they start to break down. And there are climate issues and all of these things. And I think even these small details of his were so prescient in terms of even like robot dogs as luxury goods that like twitch and like have sparks fly out of their head. I mean, wild stuff. Also a future where perhaps, I mean, there's a potential future in which there's a whole part of the internet which isn't even human readable. It's only LLM and agent readable, or it's set like MCP servers and clients, or whatever the next iteration of these things are. So I think, like, there's a chance that we'll be more distanced from the infrastructure and how information is created.
that's just it. Like,
Um,
I talk to friends, especially in the knowledge graph community and the whole library sciences. They're like, well, we just need to have more knowledge. I'm like, I don't think the AIs are going to be speaking our language, right? They may be trained on it, but I think to your point, my sense is there's going to be something else that they just invent because it's more convenient for them. Like, why be stuck with these human abstractions when you're a robot and you are capable of inventing new things. I mean, that's just it. So it's, it,
and
yeah.
to steelman the argument for building this type of internet and these products, I'm, as I'm sure you both appreciate, I'm all for as much transparency as possible and accountability. I got like Operator a while ago to go shoe shopping for me. Little known fact, I have size 17 feet, 51 European. You know this, Catherine. Buying shoes is incredibly difficult. It's also like I get triggered because as a kid, I'd go and try to buy shoes. Shoe salesmen would say, "Why don't you just take the boxes home instead?" So having an agent that can like search the internet and dig into different websites and find shoes for me was actually very useful. And it found a van store in Sydney which had a lot of shoes in my size. But then I watched, so it did something for me that was very useful. Then I watched it do it, and the operator spent like 15 minutes clicking around the internet to find these things. And I don't think that's the best interface for
Right.
an LLM with tools to do it like to do it. There must be better ways, but we still need transparency and visibility and accountability into these systems.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, especially with the zeitgeist now that, AI is going to take over every office function and whatnot. It's like if you see a lot of interfaces that people work with in most corporate settings. I mean, there are a lot of clicking and they're horrible and they're there, and you're probably not going to replace them unless you replace them all with something totally different. But yeah, so it's just going to be like toil and clicking and yeah, I'm sure these agents are going to take up like heavy drinking and just like, just really bad habits from this work. So it's
They'll
gonna
be going to LLM therapists themselves and have like
be
probably like rageaholic agent like rehab groups.
and this is how they drop the database. It's like screw this place. I'm done. Just like
Hey, yeah, if I had all the problems of a modern agent, you know, I'd shoot the schema.
yeah.
Um, so I'm interested from both of you. We've ascertained that decentralized data and AI isn't necessarily the easiest thing to build and implement and maintain. So I'm wondering what are reasons, and maybe I can ask you this first, Catherine. What are reasons? What situations would people find themselves in where it's actually pretty important to really consider these options?
I mean, I guess so when when I talk with people, particularly let's say like creatives or other or even software people like us, tech people like us, and they think about what AI would be useful for them in the future, they often talk about like truly thinking through an assistant role or even kind of like a sub creator role, so to speak. And when I think about that, I mean, then you have a few options, right? You choose one model provider, you lock to them for life, you upload your entire portfolio, you trust that that information will remain yours. Is you basically have the same closed garden platform problem we've had with every other social media platform, every other content platform, right? And I think people know that's a losing battle. And so, or I hope we've gotten the message by now. I think even the influencers that like win that battle understand that is a very, like the second the algorithm changes or the second the terms changes, you're the one that's disempowered in that information structure. And so what I ask of people is like, do we want a future where your data and the things that you want AI, whatever it is, to do for you is actually guided by you and that you have actual choice and agency in how that's used and as you say and whether it helps you do shoe shopping or this or that or whatever. I think then we must think through how decentralized works to some degree because if we don't do that, then we get locked into the same walled gardens that we've had essentially since the mid to late 2000s. And I think that that would be a real bummer. I think not only for like maybe what AI could actually do, because I think it could do many more useful things if we allow it to be personalized, but also I think in terms of what does information mean in the world? Because if AI eventually helps us consume news or consume information that we may use to make decisions about our life, then we want to at least steer that in some which way, and we want to strive for diversity of thought in some which way. And yeah, we've seen that centralized algorithms and engagement metrics and these things don't help us do that very well. So I would say from just your own personal health, perhaps like for more cool things that we can think of in the future, but also for societal health, that is useful for us to try to solve the hard parts. I don't think they're unsolvable, the hard parts of federated or distributed learning, but I think that we have to either decide we're incentivized enough as techies, and like you said, we build software that helps us do that, or we have to put pressure that allows that monopolized environment to shift or change.
Joe, I'm interested in if there's anything you'd like to add.
No.
Um,
Well, sorry, I'm listening
something
to
I'm
like
here.
there's a steamroller outside my house. I keep shaking my house, so I'm hopefully it doesn't yeah, collapse my walls or something.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely
Real world
hope it
problems.
doesn't.
Yeah, real
Yeah.
world problems. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, something, I mean, we all want and crave more agency in our lives. So let's not give those things up to agents. There are things that agents can be good at, like doing certain things. But don't give up your agency. Look, it'll be time to wrap up in a minute, but I'm interested in this has been a wide-ranging conversation, not only about why decentralized data and why decentralized AI, but the types of things people can think about and implement in their own lives and at work. I'm wondering for technical people who perhaps haven't had a lot of experience with these things, um, what are ways they can get started? And of course, I'll first say definitely check out Catherine's book, Practical Data Privacy, which goes a lot deeper into a lot of these things. But what other ways, KJ, would you encourage people to get started today?
I mean, I think we've suggested a few pieces of software. Maybe we can even make like a list whenever this is online of like different types of software that people can use, maybe also in offline mode so that things are happening without those updates going back to a centralized point. So I think thinking through local first design for your own AI. And then we've also mentioned some things that might be fun DIY projects, which is adding layers. I'm a big proponent lately of thinking through, can we add a layer between the services that we use and what we're actually typing? So our prompts, not only, I think Hugo, I'd be curious your opinion here so that we can evaluate a variety of models against one another, both local models, but then also API based models, because I think one of the things that is I'm already seeing consolidating and monopolizing is evaluation metrics across systems and keeping those for yourself, either as a developer at work or also for your own personal projects. Keeping those yourself so you can actually evaluate, I like this for this task, I like that for that task, or try out new versions. I think that that's really going to be the one thing that can help keep your development somewhat independent. And then moving from that, we've mentioned a few things that are unsolved problems or not yet fully solved problems in federated learning. So if you're a big fan of Joe's work, maybe thinking through how do we ship data engineering workflows to distributed devices, right? If you're not already working on, if somebody isn't already working on this problem and solved it, then write us. But thinking through like how if you have a friend you trust or you have multiple computers at your house, which I'm sure you do, how might you take data from one of your home assistant devices, ship it to your local computer, and then interact with that data via an LLM or whatever it is that you have, right? So just think smaller first because you can actually see those devices or log in, or if you have a friend you're willing to exchange data with, do that first. And as you play with those problems, there's many easy, reachable problems that just need to be solved by smart software and data people. And I think that could be an awesome starting place. If you have a startup, then come say hi.
I love it. And there were several questions in there. I think a wonderful way to play around with and compare local models is using Olama with Gradio, which is from Hugging Face. It's a really lightweight way to spin up um, local apps that then you can actually share web links for friends and colleagues. And what I did as like I got a pretty beefy laptop recently, and I can run six models in parallel on my laptop using Olama and put one prompt in. And actually, I'll share some code for how to do this using Gradio and see all the responses coming through. You mentioned modularity and I suppose LLM or AI pipelines earlier, or hinted towards it, as opposed to just using one model in the middle, using like maybe you have, let's say you're building a multimodal RAG system. Let's say you want to get your images and text chunks in the same embedding space, but you have different types of images. One being figures and charts, one being photos. Split it, and there are models that are far better at captioning images and charts than photos. So splitting it in this way, and then seeing the output, and then feeding that into your retrieval system. Can be really powerful. And the reason I also mention this is you can throw everything into one big infinite context like model, but to iterate and then evaluate, you actually have no visibility into the system at all. So having it into all these small parts allows you to look at your end-to-end, I suppose, failure analysis, and then introspect into which part of the pipeline is the biggest lever to pull there in order to improve your system. Mentioning Gradio, I think, Joe, I may be wrong, but did you mention or have we talked about that you you use AI Studio, Google's AI Studio? Is that right?
I sometimes do. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't. This is actually really weird. Can you? I'm sharing my screen, but for the audio version, I'm going to just talk through what's happening. Can you see my screen?
I could see two receipts.
Yeah, from Joe's Diner. This is something I was doing earlier today that had nothing to do with this, right? But AI Studio's actually got this quite. It's got a lot of cool stuff. But I can put one prompt and whatever context I want in, and see what the results of different models are. So this is Gemini 2.5 Pro's response, and this is Gemma 3 27B's response. And I could choose two different versions of Gemma there. So just quickly iterating in AI Studio. There's even, I don't know whether it's in this view, but you can even, oh yeah, you click on this and it gives you the code, so then you can actually paste it in to your own system. So that's something I find quite useful as well. Now that isn't local first, but it does allow you to play around with
That's pretty
open
handy.
weight models as well. Cool. So yeah, that's something that I thought may be useful to share there. But you can spin this up really easily locally with that type of interface using Gradio, and I'll share some code in the show notes here as well. Um, Look, thank you both
Of
for
course.
your wisdom and your way of being kind about, a lot of the hype in the space, but also helping us to manage expectations and see what's really up. But also for coming in, just sharing your time and having a great chat.
Well, it was great. It was, but yeah, thanks for having us. Um, yeah, I'd love to find a way to catch up in real life at some point. But yes, fun times. So.
Um, any final words, Catherine, for people embarking upon their decentralized journey, data or AI or otherwise?
I don't know. Damn the man.
Love it. Well, thank you all for joining. Everyone who watched live and everyone who's listening afterwards. And thanks for all the great chats in Discord as well. And see you all soon.
Later.